Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 268 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on what is the Mental Capacity Act 2005 and mental capacity. And it is Saturday, 1st of June 2024 as I record this. So today's episode is absolutely brilliant. I love the Mental Capacity Act because yes, it is a UK piece of legislation, but I'm fairly sure that if I looked it up, all Western countries and a lot of other countries around the world would have some sort of a equivalent. And even if you don't have something similar to the Mental Capacity Act in your country or state, which I find a bit unlikely, you're still going to find this podcast episode really useful because we look at what is mental capacity, how you can treat people with diminished mental capacity with respect and enable them to live a full and a productive life. And I love the Mental Capacity Act because it's really useful, and to be honest, the basic principle of it you can use in your everyday life because that's what I do. So this is going to be a great episode. I love this. This is a chapter from my brand new updated edition of the Clinical Psychology, and that's had a massive redo, and it's out now, so I really am looking forward to this. It's going to be brilliant. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is rather apt. Why there's more to life than happiness. Weird people are obsessed with the concept of happiness, from people on the street to psychological researchers pouring through citations. Unlocking the secret of true and sustained happiness is a priority for many. But should happiness really be our goal? Open quote. Psychological science tends to treat subjective well-being and happiness synonymously. Close quote. Writes Kay Kreis and colleagues in a recent paper in Perspectives on Psychological Science. However, there's plenty of evidence in some non-weird cultures. Happiness isn't not only a state that few seek, it isn't even on their radar. Emma Young, the latest feature, takes a closer look at the pursuit of happiness around the world and asks, is it really the state we should seek in? So firstly, before I actually read a paragraph or two from that write-up, I did just want to clarify for newer listeners that WEIRD stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich and Democratic Cultures. And before you ask, no, I did not remember that off the top of my head. I'm reading it from the Research Digest. Even though I think at this point, I think I could remember it if I had to. Which was definitely something I couldn't say a few years ago. So the paragraph I wanted to read was, in non-Western societies in particular, there is evidence, Josh Hello and Weird write, of a fear of happiness, with one participant in their study putting it this way, open quote, I prefer not to be too joyful, because usually joy is followed by sadness, close quote. Some studies have also found a fear of happiness in weirder groups, however. For example, students at the University of Derby. So if you want to know more about the Vice, I would definitely head on over to the BPS Research Digest website. Personally, I think this is a very interesting idea because I've done podcast episodes before about how we don't always need to be happy, because if we always search to feel happy, if we always search to feel joyful and more positive instead of baseline or normal, whatever that is for you, then you are going to feel sad because you can't always achieve happiness. Sometimes you will just feel normal, and I think normal just tends to be a mixture of positiveness, but it's nothing that you would describe as joy, or nothing that would make you go, oh my god, I was so happy. So that's sort of like stuff though. So I think that as long as you feel fine, as long as you feel positive and you don't feel depressed, then I think that's fine then. And I think that's the real core concept of this question though, because instead of always trying to be happy, I think we should always just strive to be positive at the very least, because I think if we are really happy, as that one participant said from the non-weird sample, we always tend to feel slightly down or slightly more negative after true happiness. So I think that's a very interesting take. Personally, when I first read this Psychology News article, I thought I was going to be quite anti this article and quite against it. But now I'm talking about it, I do understand where it's coming from, mainly because I've done podcast episodes on this before. So definitely check out the backlist on your favourite podcast app, or go to connorwhiteley.net/podcast and find happiness-related episodes if you want to learn more. So the next one is, uncomfortable heat may interfere with policing and justice. Okay. If you feel irritable when it's too hot, you're not the only one. Decades of studies have found links between heat, aggression, and irritability, which in turn have been shown to increase criminal activity. Yet despite the relationship between heat and law breaking, little research has linked hot weather with decisions made by those responding to a criminal activity. Writing in PNAS Nexus, a Stanford University team explores whether high temperatures may affect the decision-making of police officers, prosecutors, and judges. They find that hot weather seems to be linked to changes in decision-making of those in some criminal justice roles, with potential ramifications for those who are subjected into it. Personally, I think that there's not a great amount that I want to say about this one, simply because I want to know the strength of these correlations. I want to know the strength of these relationships, because I've seen some of this research. I've spoken about, I've heard people talk about them in some of my psychology lectures, and I mean, some of the relationships are quite weak. Like, yes, there is a relationship, but it's so weak. It's like, it is a very small correlation. So I mean, should we really be kicking up a fuss about this? Should we really be making these like grand conclusions based on it? I'm not sure. So I'm just, I mean, like, yes, when we are hot, we are more irritable. People do get angry, but is it enough to cause a meaningful impact on society? I don't know. I really, really don't. So I think this is a difficult one. And I also think that, yes, even if this is true, we've got to think about next steps. We've got to think about how do we apply this knowledge. Because, okay then, let's say that when it's hot, judges are more likely to give someone the maximum sentence. In the summer months, that's a major problem. So how do we counteract that? How do we make sure people are given a fair sentence once they've been convicted, for example? Because, I mean, like, the most logical thing would be make sure that all courtrooms are air conditioned. So where courtrooms or wherever sentencing decisions are made, for example, a judge's office, a judge would probably have to go through their notes and they would have to sit in their office to make sure these sort of buildings or these sort of rooms are air conditioned. But then again, that costs money. So is the evidence strong enough to justify that? And would there ever be the political will? Because let's face it, when it comes to the public sector and trying to do any sort of initiative, that requires political willpower and political budgets to be spent. So would there ever be that sort of will? I don't know. So I think that this is one of those annoying times where, yes, we might have this research, but then what? What do we do with it? How do we improve lives? How do we make this meaningful? So I think that's a very interesting idea. So the last one is, cynics rarely rise to the top. Do you think that most people are well-meaning and want to help others? Or does the idea that when they seem to be doing nice is always out of self-interest seem more true? The latter is a cynical outlook, and there's plenty of research linking it to all kinds of undesirable outcomes for the individual, including poorer social relationships and marital differences, as well as problems with mental and physical health. Now, new work in the British Journal of Psychology investigates the potential impact of cynicism on two specific aspects of our interactions with other people: the desire for power and the achievement of power. Across a series of studies, Ogler Radkoff and their colleagues found that cynical people appear to be more hungry for power, but paradoxically are less likely to obtain it. Okay, now that is an interesting one. And I think because I'm not that cynical, generally speaking, there are sometimes I'm incredibly cynical here. But I think generally, because I'm not cynical, I don't really understand it. Because I think, yeah, people can be extremely nice. I mean, I've met so many great people. Like this week alone, I've had so many great conversations that I don't really have a doubt. I don't have reason to doubt people. So I think that it's interesting because I mean, like when people are nice, I think they are just being nice. So I think because I think I'm not cynical myself, this is a very hard one to answer. But I can also understand why cynical people don't rise to the top. Because you've got to trust people, you've got to work with them, you've got to have strong social relationships, which you can only be by not being cynical. And that's how you rise to the top. For example, this should hopefully be confirmed on Wednesday though, but I'm hopefully going to be the president of my psychology society. And the only reason why people are likely to agree to that, well, one girl has definitely agreed to it. That's because I've been nice, I've been social, I've helped them, I proved that I'm a good person, I can be a good leader, and I'm just and without sounding like my own trumpet too much, just because I'm a really easy person to work with, and because I like doing nice things for people, so they reward me in return by like trusting me and really not being that bothered themselves about wanting to be president. So I think the takeaway from this psychology news section is just if you are cynical, try and change that. Try and trust people more. And if you aren't cynical, keep doing what you're doing because you're probably doing great. So I hope you liked this psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week has been really interesting and also really good for quite a few different reasons. I mean, I'm definitely going to do a future podcast episode on psychosis because I mean, because all I'm going to say is that I now know what it feels like to be attacked by someone with psychotic features. and persecutory delusions. I mean, that is not nice. That's actually quite horrible, but it's very interesting because of a mutual friend that I have. So I'm definitely going to do future podcast episodes about psychosis because I am interested in learning more of them. And I also think that I've also learned a lot this week about clinical psychology and how to approach people and how to de-escalate situations. So that I think was quite interesting. And I'm not going to say anything publicly because I don't think that's appropriate. But I have done a few clinical psychology reflections for clinical psychology reflections, the Volume 6, which will come out in 2025, simply because I think there is a lot I've learned about clinical psychology and clinical work, and I think there are lots of takeaways. Well, simply because what to do and what not to do when you are attacked by someone verbally and publicly. But going on to more positive things though, like I've had a lot of lovely conversations this week with friends, with the people that I'm going to be doing the psychology society with the next year at my university. They are honestly lovely. I've had some great conversations. I'm really looking forward to helping to run that society because it's just going to be a lot of fun. Like we've got a lot of good plans, and everything is just going really, really well in that department. And we're all meeting for the first time on Wednesday, so I really am looking forward to that meeting. I've also had the meetings about my research that I'm doing at the university with my supervisor because she submitted her thesis, so she's now got a bit more time for me. And I've also had my counselling assessment for a local charity, which is definitely going to be really useful, and I feel a lot more hopeful now. And life is just really good, which I'm quite happy to say. And again, though, counselling assessments, I didn't expect to learn too much from it, but I will tell you guys this: they had evening appointments because we all know the problem with mental health settings is that they only have appointments at 9 till 5, which is, let's face it, is absolutely useless if you can't get time off work. Even more so if you don't know your work schedule, like me, come mid-June to mid-July. I don't know what my availability is for counselling, even though I really need it. Though. I was amazed and I was so grateful that this charity actually has appointments up till 8 o'clock at night, which I think is amazing. I'm definitely going to reflect on that because I think that's revolutionary. Yeah, and to be honest, I've heard lecturers talk about it in lectures before, but to actually see it and actually have that as an option as a client, I'm extremely grateful, and I think that is quite life-changing. I'm a lot more hopeful, quite simply because of that extra availability, because before my availability was literally any day, Monday to Friday, 4 till 5, and that's not really much of an availability. But now I'm free any time Monday to Friday, 4 till 8, which is a lot more sessions that I could possibly be booked in to. Well, I can possibly be booked in for. So thankfully, life is really good in that department. And as always, I always love to know your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi Wiley or contact me on LinkedIn or Facebook. And I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Clinical Psychology 2nd Edition. So I am so excited about this book because not only is it clinical psychology, so it talks about what is a clinical psychology, what do clinical psychologists do, how do they work, and it really focuses on formulation and how does clinical psychology help clients, because that's what the first edition covered. But the second edition not only is basically everything updated, so there's a lot more formulation content and a lot of other really useful sections, but it focuses on mindfulness based interventions, which I think are always interested. Personally, I am slightly cynical about mindfulness, but they are really useful. I do talk about the like evidence base and how they're used in a clinical psychology to help people. And then we also talk about Mental Capacity Act, my favourite bit of legislation ever, after copyright law, but we don't talk about that in this book. So, Mental Capacity Act, it's insanely useful. I love it. We talk about diminished responsibility, the deprivation of liberty, and so many absolutely critical concepts that if you're a clinical psychologist in the UK, and again, I think this is quite common around the world, then I would definitely say that you've got to know this stuff. And this is a great introduction to those topics because it gives you a very wide range of topics within clinical psychology, but it also gives you the depth. So by the end of this really great, really easy to understand book, you're going to have a really good and solid understanding of clinical psychology, which will help you on your clinical psychology journey, in addition to lectures and masters. So that is Clinical Psychology, 2nd edition, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And you can get the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence at selected audiobook retailers like Kobo, Spotify, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems like Biblioteca, Overdrive, and Baker & Taylor. And whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you wanted to become a patron and get tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/The Psychology Hour Podcast. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what is the Mental Capacity Act and what is mental capacity. This is a great chapter. I really enjoyed it, so let's dive into it. Of course, there's a little note up front here. So the legislation we'll be discussing in this final section of the book is a piece of legislation passed by the United Kingdom, and whilst I am sure other countries have such laws in place, the exact details of these laws will vary country to country. Also, I am not a lawyer or legal expert, so this is not any sort of official legal professional or any form of advice. In a past chapter, I gave you a brief overlook of the legislation to ease you into the topic, but now I want to deep dive a lot more because it is so interesting. And of all the brand new updated chapters I'm writing for this 2nd edition, I have to admit that I'm so excited about the Mental Capacity Act 2005. I'll admit that I'm very unique in this fact because I seriously doubt that legislation makes anyone excited, but considering I do like the legal system, laws and the like, it makes sense for me to enjoy this area. Also, I love the debate that the Mental Capacity Act stirs up, because the Act does allow us to do very interesting things with people with mental health conditions, but we do walk a very, very thin ethical line between right and extremely wrong. For example, Let's use a quick fictional example to kick off the chapter. Let's say there's a woman called SW, whom has a long history of paranoid schizophrenia, as well as she suffers from several physical health conditions like diabetes. Then, when she's staying in institutional care, her left foot has become gangrenous. This does require surgery. Yet, SW refuses to have the surgery done, and this risks infection spreading and becoming so bad that the foot needs to be detached from her leg without medical help. SW surgeons want to remove the foot to make sure that infection doesn't spread, but she refuses it. So the question is, should SW be forced to have the surgery? Personally, I think this is a hard one because I can see both sides of the argument. I think you could argue yes, she should be forced to have the surgery, as otherwise the infection will spread and gangrene can kill you, so her life is at risk. On the other hand, you could argue that the choice has to be hers because it is her body, so it's her choice. I personally would go for the first option, because I want to save her life, but I do understand the arguments against the full surgery too. And what do you think? To be honest, you guys can contact me. I would love to have a small discussion about this. What is mental capacity? Whenever we talk about mental capacity, we are talking about the fact that generally we all have the right to make our own decisions about our behaviour as long as they're legal, and this idea of a free choice is protected by law. However, for some people that have a severe mental or physical condition, they might require help as well as support to empower and to protect them. We would say that these people have less mental capacity than healthy people. Typically, the Mental Capacity Act is applied to people who suffer a stroke, brain injury, dementia, or a learning disability. As I mentioned in a past chapter, we must never assume that someone doesn't have mental capacity just because of the label of their condition gives them. I cannot stress that enough. Overall mental capacity is a person's ability to make a decision, and we need legislation around this because people need to be protected, and we have to make sure that we can empower and protect people who can't make decisions for themselves. How could the Mental Capacity Act affect people with a learning or intellectual disability? So for the rest of this chapter, I want to highlight how the Mental Capacity Act does or could impact different people with different neurodevelopmental or mental health conditions. Therefore, when it comes to learning disabilities, according to the NHS website, these disabilities affect the way that a person learns new things throughout the lifespan. As well as to have a learning disability, a person has to have an IQ below 70, and this would negatively impact their daily life. As a result, people with a learning disability could struggle to understand complex and new information, learn any newer skills, and not be able to live or cope independently. Also, the NHS website highlights how this is a common set of neurodevelopmental conditions, since 1.5 million people in the UK have a learning disability, with 350,000 people having a severe learning disability. Overall, the Mental Capacity Act might be used on these people to make sure that they are protected and empowered, since people with learning disabilities might not be able to make decisions for themselves. What about strokes? Another set of conditions that the Mental Capacity Act is typically used on is stroke survivors, because as explained at stroke.org, a stroke occurs when a blood vessel in the brain is either blocked or bursts, so the blood supply to the brain is cut off to various extents. As a result, when someone has a stroke, they often need a longer time to undergo rehabilitation before they can recover their independence. Just unfortunately, a lot of stroke survivors don't fully recover. In the UK, there's about 100,000 people have a stroke each year, and there are 1.2 million stroke survivors in the UK. This lack of independence and the disruption to the brain that stroke causes can make someone lack the mental capacity to make important decisions. Mental Capacity Act and brain injuries. The last condition I want to zero in on is brain injuries, because a person has a traumatic brain injury when they experience a disruption to the normal functioning of the brain. And the CDC in the USA states this can be caused by a bump, blow, jolt, or another injury that penetrates the brain itself. The effects of the brain injury can be wide-ranging depending on what area is impacted, and the severity is different for everyone too. Yet brain injuries aren't just external, they can also be caused by internal factors like a tumour, stroke, hemorrhaging, or epiphyseal, which I completely butchered. That is not how you say it, and I apologise. Basically, it's a fancy way of saying a brain infection or a brain inflammation, as well as there are around 350,000 hospital admissions for brain injuries in the UK every year. Why might a person not have mental capacity? On the whole, to wrap up this chapter, there are conditions and medical problems that cause a person to lack the mental capacity. But it's important to know that just because someone has one of these conditions doesn't mean they lack mental capacity. For someone to lack mental capacity, according to mentalhealth.org.uk, they would need to not be able to understand the information given to them to make a particular decision, retain this information long enough to be able to make the decision, not be able to communicate their decision, and they couldn't weigh up or use the information given to them to make the decision. So now we understand what mental capacity is. How does the Mental Capacity Act help clinical psychologists to reduce distress and improve lives? So that's what the next chapter focuses on in the Clinical Psychology 2nd edition. And just going off my own personal experience here, though, is that so earlier in the introduction I mentioned that the Mental Capacity Act you can sort of use in your everyday life. Now, what I meant by that was the Mental Capacity Act basically states outright that you cannot assume someone can't do something just because of their condition. That is something I think is invaluable. Because I have friends, they have disabilities, they have physical health conditions, and they have mental health conditions too. So when I'm talking to them, when I'm thinking about them, when I'm planning that I want to do something with them, if a thought pops up into my head saying, "Oh, you can't do this because of your friend, and your friend can't do it because of their condition," I immediately go, "No. Is that actually true?" And if I think that it might be true, some of the time I ask my friend, or to be honest, I just still suggest the idea to my friend, because they're still my friend, and I don't want them to think that I'm just judging them, or I'm just assuming that they can't do something because of their condition. And my friends are really appreciative about that. Granted, yes, sometimes when I go out or when I want to do quite big things with my friends, I do plan with them in mind, and that's something else that works though. So it's either finding a compromise. For example, when I went up to London with my friend for my birthday, I made sure that I planned it so there wasn't tons of walking in it though, because my friend has a chronic fatigue. So it's that sort of like compromise. But I didn't just instantly go, no, I can't do this, or me and my friend that can't do this because of them, because that's this inner power in. So that's what I mean about you can use it in your everyday life. And personally, the mental capacity act is just fun to know about. I think it's really interesting because at heart I can be quite a legal nerd at times. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did. As you can hear in my voice, I love this sort of stuff. I love clinical psychology. I love the mental capacity act, and I just love helping people, to be honest. So if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Clinical Psychology 2nd edition, available in all the usual places. Or you can support the podcast by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/The Psychology World podcast. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at connorwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.